15 world-renowned specialists had just pronounced the heir to the city's most ruthless crime syndicate a lost cause. But Eleanor, an exhausted, drowning-in-debt neonatal nurse, saw what they all missed. What she did next wasn't just medical heresy. It was a death sentence if she failed. The storm that battered the reinforced glass of Chicago Presbyterian Hospital was nothing compared to the tempest brewing on the 4th floor. The neonatal intensive care unit in ICU, usually a sanctuary of quiet humming machines and hushed whispers, had been commandeered. Burly men in tailored dark Brioni suits stood like gargoyles at every exit, their eyes scanning the sterile corridors. Under their jackets, the distinct bulges of concealed firearms were entirely ignored by the hospital administration. When Gabriel Russo, the cold-blooded underboss of the Chicago outfit, took over a hospital wing, no one asked questions. Gabriel's younger sister Isabella had been brought in 3 days ago, hemorrhaging and fighting for her life. Isabella was the only light in Gabriel's otherwise pitch-black world. She had fallen pregnant by a man Gabriel had sworn to kill a rival, who was now at the bottom of Lake Michigan. Despite the child's lineage, Gabriel had sworn on his mother's grave to protect Isabella and her baby. But fate, it seemed, was not intimidated by the Mafia. Isabella had gone into premature labor at just 24 weeks. The baby, a tiny boy named Leo, was born weighing barely 1 pound 6 ounces. His skin was translucent, his lungs practically non-existent. For 72 hours the boy hovered on the razor's edge of death. Gabriel did what a man with unlimited power and limitless wealth does. He bought the best minds in the world. He chartered private jets to fly in 15 of the most lauded pediatric specialists on the globe. There was Dr. Arthur Penhaligon from Johns Hopkins, an arrogant pioneer in neonatal cardiology. There was Dr. Simon Reyes from the Mayo Clinic and Dr. Olivia Chen from Cedars-Sinai. Over 3 agonizing days, a revolving door of elite physicians in crisp white coats stood over little Leo's incubator, running complex diagnostics, ordering cutting-edge medications, and debating in hushed, grim tones in the VIP conference room. And standing quietly in the corner of the room, invisible to the billionaires and the medical titans, was Elena Jenkins. Elena was 27, running on 3 hours of sleep and drowning in $45,000 of medical debt, left behind by her late mother's battle with leukemia. She lived in a cramped, drafty apartment on the South Side and survived on stale cafeteria bagels. But Eleanor had a gift. While the Ivy League doctors looked at charts, printouts, and statistics, Elena looked at the patients. She had an almost preternatural intuition for the tiny, fragile lives in her care. From the moment the Russo syndicate stormed the floor, Elena was the only staff member who didn't flinch. On day 2, when Gabriel's massive enforcer, Carmine the Bull Delmonico, had stepped too close to the sterile field, Elena had snapped at him. "I don't care how many bodies you've buried," she had whispered sharply, pointing a sanitized finger at the giant's chest. "You take one more step toward this incubator with your unwashed hands, and I will personally throw you out." The entire room had frozen. The doctors held their breath. Carmine reached for his jacket. But Gabriel Russo had simply raised a hand, stopping his man. He had looked at Elena, truly looked at her, with eyes like crushed obsidian. There was a flicker of something deeply intense, a spark of dangerous curiosity, before he ordered Carmine out of the room. Since then, Gabriel's dark gaze followed the poor, exhausted nurse every time she moved around his nephew's bed. Despite Elena's meticulous care, Leo was fading. By the end of the 3rd day, the 15th specialist, a renowned pulmonologist from Boston, stepped back from the incubator and slowly removed his glasses. The tiny monitor beside the bed was flashing angry red numbers. Leo's blood oxygen levels were plummeting. His tiny chest barely rose, even as the state-of-the-art oscillating ventilator forced high-pressure oxygen into his lungs. His lungs are too stiff. The respiratory distress syndrome is absolute. The Boston specialist whispered to Dr. Harrison Keller, the hospital's chief of neonatology. We've maximized the surfactant therapy. We've pushed the ventilator to the absolute limit. His heart is starting to give out from the strain. Is there nothing else? Dr. Keller asked, wiping sweat from his brow, terrified of the Mafia boss waiting in the hall. 15 of us have reviewed the chart. Harrison, the specialist said, grimly. Science has its limits. The boy is dying. You need to tell the uncle to prepare for the end. From her station across the room, Elena watched the doctors sign the death warrant of a child she had spent 72 hours singing softly to in the dead of night. Her heart twisted. She looked at the monitors, then down at Leo. Something wasn't right. The doctors were focused entirely on the lack of oxygen, treating it as a failure of the premature lungs. But Eleanor noticed something else, a tiny, almost imperceptible rhythm on the monitor. Every time the high-powered ventilator pushed a breath into the baby, Leo's fragile heart rate dipped dangerously low, and the blood pressure monitor fluctuated wildly. Pulsus paradoxus, Elena thought her mind racing back to a chaotic stint she had done years ago at an underfunded clinic in rural Appalachia, where they didn't have high-tech machines to rely on. She stared at the tiny chest. The right side was slightly more elevated than the left. It wasn't just premature lungs. It was a tension pneumothorax. The aggressive high-pressure oxygen the 15 brilliant doctors had ordered to save him was actually leaking into the chest cavity, creating a pocket of trapped air that was slowly crushing the baby's heart. It didn't show up clearly on the portable X-rays because the high ventilator pressure was masking the lung collapse, blending it into the hazy whiteout of his underdeveloped tissue. The machine keeping him alive was the very thing killing him. The atmosphere in the glass-walled conference room was suffocating. Gabriel Russo sat at the head of the long mahogany table perfectly still. His tailored suit jacket was unbuttoned, revealing the sleek shoulder holster he didn't even bother to hide. Beside him, Isabella wept softly into her hands, confined to a wheelchair, pale and trembling. Dr. Keller stood at the opposite end of the table, flanked by 3 of the elite specialists. Keller's hands were shaking so badly he had to grip the edges of the table to steady himself. Mr. Russo, Dr. Keller began, his voice cracking. We have consulted the 15 top experts in neonatal care. We have tried experimental steroids, maximal ventilation, and aggressive vasopressors. But Leo's body is failing. His oxygen saturation is in the 60s. His heart rate is dropping. Continuing care at this point is only prolonging his suffering. Gabriel's eyes locked onto Dr. Keller. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You promised me, Gabriel said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that vibrated through the floorboards, that bringing the best doctors in the country would save him. We did our best, sir. Medical science has done all it can. Gabriel stood up slowly. The enforcers in the room instantly stiffened. Isabella let out a heart-breaking sob. If my nephew dies tonight, Dr. Keller, Gabriel said, softly, leaning over the table, I am going to lock the doors to this hospital, and I will burn it to the ground with every single one of your 15 experts inside. In the NICU, Elena was out of time. She had just watched Dr. Keller and the specialists leave the room to deliver the fatal news. She was alone with Leo, save for the 2 armed guards standing on the other side of the heavy glass doors. The alarms on Leo's monitor switched from a frantic rhythmic beep to a solid, continuous wail. Code blue. Leo was crashing. His heart rate plummeted from 120 beats per minute to 60, then 40. His skin, already pale, was turning a horrifying shade of dusky blue. Elena sprinted to the door, hitting the intercom button. "I need a doctor in room 4B, immediately, he's arresting!" She screamed. Down the hall she saw Dr. Keller step out of the conference room, followed closely by a terrifyingly furious Gabriel Russo. "Dr. Keller!" Elena yelled through the cracked door as he approached. "It's a pneumothorax. The ventilator is trapping air. It's crushing his vena cava. We need to take him off the vent and decompress his chest." Dr. Keller looked at her, his eyes wild with panic. "Are you insane, Jenkins? His lungs are stiff. If you take him off the ventilator, he suffocates in seconds. Stand down. We are initiating end-of-life protocols." "He doesn't have seconds," Elena shouted, her voice breaking. "He's dying right now. I said stand down, nurse." Dr. Keller barked, stepping toward the room. "The board has made its decision." Elena looked at the doctor. Then she looked past him, locking eyes with Gabriel Russo. The Mafia boss's eyes were wide, taking in the chaos, his gaze burning into hers. For a fraction of a second, Elena didn't see a ruthless killer. She saw a desperate man watching his family die. "If I do this, my career is over. I'll go to federal prison for practicing medicine without a license. Or Gabriel Russo will put a bullet in my head." Elena stepped back into the room, and she hit the emergency lockdown button. With a heavy mechanical clack, the thick reinforced glass doors of room 4B slid shut and magnetically locked. Dr. Keller hit the glass, his eyes bulging. "Jenkins, open this door." "What are you doing?" Gabriel rushed forward, shoving the doctor aside. He slammed his fists against the glass. "Open the door!" he roared, drawing his weapon. Inside the sterile room, the noise of the outside world muffled. Elena drowned out her fear. She moved with ruthless, terrifying precision. She reached for the $100,000 oscillating ventilator. The machine, 15 brilliant doctors, swore was the only thing keeping the baby alive. She turned it off. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the flatlining alarm of the heart monitor. Outside, Gabriel Russo was screaming unheard threats, raising his gun, ready to shatter the reinforced glass. Carmine and 3 other men were throwing their shoulders against the door. Elena ignored them. She grabbed a pediatric crash cart. She didn't have time to wait for anesthesia or sterile drapes. She ripped open a package containing a 22-gauge needle massive compared to the tiny, fragile body of the baby. She cleaned a small spot on Leo's right chest with a swipe of iodine. Through the glass, Dr. Keller realized what she was about to do. He began screaming, pointing frantically. "She's murdering him!" He seemed to be yelling to Gabriel. Gabriel's face twisted in pure homicidal rage. He aimed the barrel of his Glock directly at Elena's head. "Forgive me," Elena prayed. She found the second intercostal space, right at the mid-clavicular line. Taking a deep breath, Elena plunged the needle directly into the infant's chest. Crack! The first bullet from Gabriel's gun hit the reinforced glass, webbing it in a massive spiderweb of white fractures. Elena didn't flinch. She pushed the needle deeper, pulling back on the syringe, praying for a miracle as the heavy glass door buckled under the weight of the Mafia's fury. Crack! A second deafening gunshot echoed through the sterile halls of the neonatal intensive care unit. The reinforced glass of room 4B, designed to withstand hurricane-force winds, finally gave way. It imploded inward with a crystalline crash, showering the sanitized linoleum floor with thousands of glittering shards. Before the glass had even settled, Carmine, the bull, Delmonico threw his massive shoulder against the ruined doorframe, tearing it off its tracks. Gabriel Russo stormed through the breach, his tailored Brioni suit speckled with glass dust, his eyes completely unhinged. He crossed the room in 2 massive strides, grabbing Elena by the collar of her scrubs and slamming her back against the medical supply cabinets. The cold, heavy steel of his Glock 19 was pressed so hard against the side of her forehead that it bruised the bone. "What did you do?" Gabriel roared, his voice trembling with a terrifying primal grief. "What did you do to him?" Elena couldn't breathe. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, and the metallic tang of fear flooded her mouth. But her hands miraculously were steady. She didn't look at the gun. She didn't look at the furious Mafia boss, who was a hair trigger, pull away from painting the wall with her blood. She pointed a single trembling finger at the tiny baby in the incubator. "Listen," she choked out. Gabriel's finger tightened on the trigger, a muscle feathering in his jaw. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't—" "Shh!" It was a soft, barely perceptible sound, like a bicycle tire slowly letting out air. Gabriel froze. He looked down at the tiny, fragile body of his nephew. The 22-gauge needle Elena had plunged into Leo's chest was acting as an exhaust pipe. For 3 days, the high-pressure ventilator ordered by the 15 world-class specialists had been pumping oxygen into a microscopic tear in the premature infant's stiff lung. That air had nowhere to go. It had built up inside the chest cavity, creating a tension pneumothorax, a pressurized pocket of trapped air that had pushed Leo's tiny heart completely out of alignment, crushing his vena cava and stopping blood from returning to the chambers. As the trapped air escaped through Elena's needle, the immense pressure inside the baby's chest equalized. On the monitor above the bed, the flatline alarm that had been wailing a continuous, agonizing note suddenly stuttered. Beep. A pause. Beep. Gabriel's eyes widened, the gun trembling against Elena's temple. Beep. 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 The heart rate monitor, which had plummeted to a fatal 40 beats per minute, began to climb with miraculous speed. 60. 80. 120. Elena watched, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. She grabbed a small chest tube kit from the tray beside her, moving slowly so Gabriel wouldn't shoot her out of reflex. The air was crushing his heart. She whispered, her voice shaking but firm. I had to let it out. Before their eyes, the horrifying, dusky blue color that had overtaken little Leo's translucent skin began to recede. A healthy, flushed pink crept back into his cheeks, down his arms, and to the tips of his toes. The oxygen saturation numbers on the screen skyrocketed from a dismal 62% to 85%, then into the high 90s. Leo's chest, which had been rigidly uneven, began to rise and fall in a smooth, natural rhythm. The baby let out a tiny, weak squeak, the most beautiful sound Eleanor had ever heard. "My God," Gabriel whispered. The gun slipped from his grip, falling to his side. He stepped back, staring at the incubator as if he were witnessing a resurrection, which in many ways he was. "Arrest her." The spell was broken by the frantic, shrieking voice of Dr. Harrison Keller. The chief of neonatology had finally pushed past the mob enforcers, trailed by 2 hospital security guards. Keller's face was purple with outrage, his white coat flapping as he pointed a shaking finger at Elena. "She is a rogue nurse," Keller yelled, looking frantically at Gabriel. "Mister Russo, she violated every hospital protocol. She performed an unauthorized surgical intervention. She assaulted your nephew. Security, restrain her. Call the Chicago Police Department." The 2 security guards stepped cautiously into the room, their hands reaching for their cuffs. They didn't make it 2 steps. Carmine Delmonico, moved with a speed that defied his massive bulk, stepping between the guards and Elena. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply crossed his tree-trunk arms and glared down at them. The guards instantly stopped, suddenly realizing how severely outmatched they were. Dr. Keller spluttered, stepping forward. "Mr. Russo, please. This woman is dangerous. She took the boy off life support against the unanimous recommendation of 15 of the top specialists in the country. We need to re-intubate him immediately, or he will—" "Shut your mouth," Gabriel said. His voice wasn't a yell. It was a deadly quiet hiss that froze the air in the room. Gabriel slowly turned away from the incubator and locked eyes with the chief of neonatology. 15 specialists, Gabriel said softly, taking a slow step toward the doctor. 15 of the most expensive, highly educated minds in the world. And you told me my nephew was a lost cause. You told me to prepare for his death. "He was dying, sir," Keller stammered, stepping back, the arrogance suddenly draining from his face as he realized he was standing inches away from the underboss of the Chicago outfit. His lungs— "Look at the monitor." "Doctor." Gabriel interrupted, pointing his gun hand toward the screen. Dr. Keller blinked, pushing his glasses up his nose. He looked at the heart rate, a steady, strong 145 beats per minute. He looked at the oxygen saturation, a perfect 98%. He looked down at the baby, who was now pink stable and resting peacefully, the lethal tension, pneumothorax, completely resolved. Keller's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. It was a misdiagnosis," he whispered, horrified. The X-rays. The vent pressure masked the collapse. A poor nurse from the South Side saw what 15 billionaires of medicine missed, Gabriel said, his voice dripping with venom. He took another step, towering over the doctor. "If you or your security guards or anyone in this hospital touches a single hair on Nurse Jenkins's head, I will make sure they never find your bodies. Do we understand each other?" Dr. Keller nodded frantically, entirely devoid of color. Gabriel turned back to Elena. The murderous rage in his dark eyes had vanished, replaced by something Elena couldn't quite identify. It looked like absolute, unyielding loyalty. "Fix him," Gabriel told her softly. "Whatever he needs. You're in charge now." 3 days passed. Under Elena's vigilant round-the-clock care, Leo made a recovery that defied every medical textbook. With the tension, pneumothorax properly drained via a tiny chest tube, and the aggressive ventilator permanently removed his lungs, began to heal. He was placed on a gentle CPAP machine, and for the first time in his short life, he opened his eyes. Isabella wept tears of pure joy holding her baby's tiny hand through the incubator portholes. But miracles in the medical world rarely go unpunished by bureaucracy. On the 4th morning, Gabriel Russo had to leave the hospital for the first time to attend to syndicate business. Within an hour of his departure, Elena was summoned to the hospital administration offices. Sitting behind a massive mahogany desk was Dr. Harrison Keller, flanked by the hospital's legal team and an HR representative. The bruising to Keller's ego had festered into a vindictive rage. "Nurse Jenkins," Keller said, coldly, tossing a thick file onto the desk. "You are hereby terminated effective immediately for gross insubordination, violating standard operating procedures, and practicing medicine without a license." Elena stood in the center of the room, still wearing her scrubs. "I saved his life. You were going to let him die." "You got lucky," Keller sneered. "You took a wild gamble that happened to pay off. But this hospital cannot employ a rogue element. Furthermore, the board has decided to file a formal complaint with the state nursing board. Your license will be revoked by the end of the month, and our legal team is forwarding a recommendation to the district attorney to press charges for medical battery." "You can't do this," Elena whispered, feeling the floor drop out from under her. "I have $45,000 in medical debt. If I lose my license, security will escort you to your locker," Keller said, looking down at his paperwork, dismissing her entirely. "You have 15 minutes to vacate the premises." 2 hours later, Elena sat on the edge of a sagging mattress in her freezing one-bedroom apartment on the south side. The radiator clanked uselessly in the corner. She stared at the cardboard box holding her stethoscope, her favorite coffee mug, and a few faded photographs of her late mother. She had done the right thing. She had saved a child's life, and it was going to cost her everything. She buried her face in her hands and let the tears come. She cried for the sheer exhaustion of the last week, for the terror of the gun to her head, and for the bleak, terrifying future of bankruptcy and legal battles that awaited her. A heavy knock at the door rattled the cheap wood in its frame. Elena froze. The police, she thought, her stomach twisting. Keller had moved fast. She wiped her face, stood up, and slowly unbolted the door. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was not a police officer. It was Carmine Delmonico, his massive frame practically blocking out the light. Behind him stood Gabriel Russo, wearing a flawless charcoal suit and a midnight black overcoat. "Mr. Russo," Elena breathed, taking a step back. "May we come in, Elena?" Gabriel asked. His tone was surprisingly gentle. Elena nodded numbly, stepping aside. The two men entered the cramped apartment. Gabriel took in the peeling wallpaper, the drafty windows, and the stack of red-stamped, past-due medical bills sitting on the tiny kitchen table. "I went to the hospital this afternoon," Gabriel said, turning to face her. "I was looking for the woman who saved my nephew. Imagine my surprise when I found a different nurse at his station. Dr. Keller fired me," Elena said, her voice shaking slightly. "He's pulling my license. He's pressing charges." Gabriel smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile that sent a shiver down Elena's spine. "Dr. Keller and I had a very long, very illuminating conversation in his office an hour ago," Gabriel said smoothly. "I brought along a few associates of mine. We reviewed the hospital's policies together." "What did you do?" Elena asked, her eyes widening. "Let's just say Dr. Keller has decided to take an immediate, permanent, and unpaid sabbatical," Gabriel said. "He realized that the stress of the job was bad for his health, very bad. In fact, he signed a letter of resignation before hastily booking a one-way flight to Costa Rica. He won't be bothering anyone ever again." Elena stared at him, stunned. "The board?" "The board received a generous multi-million-dollar donation from the Russo family this afternoon." Gabriel continued pacing slowly around her small living room, along with a very polite suggestion that all disciplinary actions against Nurse Elena Jenkins be immediately expunged from the record. They agreed enthusiastically. Carmine stepped forward and placed a sleek black leather briefcase on the kitchen table, right on top of her overdue bills. He clicked the brass locks and opened it. Elena gasped. Neatly stacked inside were rows of crisp-banded $100 bills. $50,000, Gabriel said, "to clear your mother's medical debt and to get you out of this apartment. Consider it back pay for the overtime you put in saving my family." I can't take this," Elena stammered, overwhelmed. "It's too much. I just did my job." "You did what 15 of the most arrogant men in the world couldn't do," Gabriel corrected her, his voice dropping into a tone of absolute reverence. "You saw him. You didn't see a mobster's nephew, And you didn't see a statistical failure. You saw a baby who needed help. You risked your life and your career for him. Gabriel stepped closer, looking down at her with intense, obsidian eyes. The Chicago outfit does not forgive its enemies, Elena, he said softly. But we also never ever forget a debt. You gave my sister her life back. You are under my protection now. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a heavy embossed business card. He handed it to her. It had the logo of the newly minted Isabella Russo Pediatric Foundation. I bought a private clinic downtown this morning, Gabriel told her. State of the art, best equipment money can buy. I need a director of neonatal care to run it. No arrogant doctors, no bureaucrats. Just you calling the shots, saving lives. The starting salary is triple what Presbyterian was paying you. Elena looked at the card, then at the briefcase of money, and finally at the ruthless Mafia boss standing in her living room. The sheer absurdity of her reality washed over her, and for the first time in weeks, a genuine smile broke across her face. "When do I start?" she asked. Gabriel smiled back. "Tomorrow morning. Bring your stethoscope." Elena's unthinkable gamble proves that true brilliance isn't always found in expensive degrees or elite titles. Sometimes it's born from desperate compassion and the courage to challenge the system. She risked her freedom and her life to save a child everyone else had abandoned, earning the undying loyalty of the city's most dangerous family. If this story of courage against all odds moved, you hit that like button, share this with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more